Welcome to Foundstone Conversations. I'm Andrew Bird, and in today's episode, we're chatting with Brad Krauskopf, who's the founder and CEO of The Hub, Australia's largest privately owned co-working provider. Brad's also the co-chair and co-founder of Flexible Workspace Australia, and is heavily involved in driving innovation across the co-working community. So a very warm welcome to you, Brad.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me on the show.
And thanks for hosting us here in the brand new offices in Church Street, Richmond, and the brand new podcast studio. It's great to be here.
It's probably our most popular amenity, the podcast studio, along with the meeting rooms. But yeah, very popular.
Yeah, awesome. It's we actually came from your Flinders Street offices. We were there late last year and moved into Richmond, so it's great to be in a brand new space and experience it firsthand as a customer. So I think this is number 6 in Melbourne for you.
Location? It is. It's number 6, and a couple more on the way in Melbourne. And then we're across Sydney, Brisbane, Canberra, and Adelaide as well. And then now, post-pandemic, we will add on Perth soon enough, but also suburban and regional locations.
Okay.
Which is something that we weren't looking at so soon.
Yes.
Pre-pandemic, but yeah, there's been a lot of changes over the last couple of years.
Fascinating. We'll get into a bit more of that as we go through. So just to kick it off, in terms of to give our listeners and viewers a bit more context of you and the organisation, if we wind back to, I think it was 2010 when you founded The Hub.
Yep.
And if we wind back just a bit further than that, I believe you were studying and working in Madrid in Spain.
Yeah.
During the GFC. And can you tell us what was happening there and how that kind of led into you starting the business?
Sure. Look, I guess it was interesting. It was one of those ones where all around the world in little pockets, you had co-working emerging without it all being connected and without everybody, everybody knowing about it. Like remembering that, 2009, you would have had Facebook being maybe 6 or 7 years old.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah. Yes. So like people sometimes forget just how much stuff has changed in terms of connectivity over, since I would have been in Madrid back in 2008.
I see.
But yeah, what you had was a lot of people had essentially lost their jobs, and they went into the freelance. The freelance economy was born, or it certainly grew in size a huge amount. And what happened was everybody was working from home, and they needed to escape the isolation of working from home, and they started congregating at co-working spaces.
Right.
So it was very much a community, people getting together, looking at how do they start their businesses, but really solving the loneliness of working from home and needing to be a part of something bigger. So that's how Hub was born over in Madrid and in Europe. I got into starting up the Hub in Madrid. Initially, Hub Australia was part of a group over in Europe, but then we spun out and we set up independently here in Australia. The business very much was born out of the freelance economy, but then evolved. Today we consider ourselves a hospitality company, mostly focused on helping businesses and their teams love where they work.
Awesome. It's fascinating to hear that, again, looking back, more than a decade of what was happening in the GFC. And I've heard you talk on some other interviews of how even, you look at freelance and the loneliness and the mental health side of things, how that's still as relevant and even more relevant today. It's just fascinating, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And it's almost the pandemic it's kind of a bit of a back to the basics in some respect, although it's doing it for much larger companies, where they're larger organisations and growing organisations. They still need to build a culture. They still need to provide an environment where they attract and retain the best team, the best talent, and that means creating an environment where people choose to work in these organisations, and the workplace is a tool in the toolbox for companies to help attract and retain the best talent, and make them feel like they're part of something bigger. People don't want to work from the kitchen table or from home all the time.
Yes.
It's helpful some of the time, but not all the time.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I've heard you say that before, that when you ask your customers back then and even now, that helping them to attract and retain talent is one of the biggest values. So I think that's enormous. If we roll straight into strategy, then we're obviously a strategy advisory, and we always like to, we're fascinated to ask founders like yourself over the journey of, you've made some pretty tough decisions over that decade, no doubt, and you're still making tough decisions now. There's still uncertainty in all aspects of the economy. But if you look back to 2010, and then I believe, was it about 2016, if you can take us through, you shifted the business to more the hospitality premium space.
Yeah.
Can you tell us, as a leader personally, how you look at making strategy decisions and some of the tough ones and how you kind of navigate through those?
Yeah, look, with the benefit of hindsight, you always like to believe they were deliberate, well thought through decisions.
Yes.
But a lot of things are decisions are ultimately made out of necessity.
Mm-hmm.
We'd been running for 6 odd years. And essentially the business needed to figure out how to, be a profitable business that could scale. You couldn't keep investing in the infrastructure. For instance, once you go 5 years on in a fit out, you need to start making a further investment. So, if you haven't been generating cash internally, then that means going externally to fit out the same space all over again.
I see.
So, you've got to be figuring out a model that can sustain itself. Through speaking to our customers, what you just touched on before, the thing that kept on coming up was businesses using Hub to help them attract and retain the best staff. Mm-hmm. Once we realised that the game that we were in was ultimately staff attraction and retention and not a flexible desk, that was just what we were selling. But ultimately the business we were in was helping those businesses grow and retain their teams. Once we realised that we could best deliver that with bigger, more premium spaces and with a focus on hospitality and customer service. And ultimately, it was almost freeing to be able to finally figure out a customer that we could service profitably.
Yeah, right. Okay.
And really well, like not like
Mm-hmm.
Just trying every day we're still trying every day to get better at it. But it removes some of the struggle of, essentially figuring out a business model that worked.
I see. Yeah, that's really interesting. And it sounds like you were pretty close to what was happening in society broadly, as well as the economy.
Yeah.
Because so often decisions in the wrong context, they could be a great decision 5 years ago or 5 years in the future. But it sounds like you took a really kind of close read of insights, what was happening. So I think that's really important. When we look at organisations in terms of economic impact and sustainability they're having, I think it'd be great to hear a bit more about your organisation and being certified as a B-Corp.
Yeah.
There's some leaders out there probably still don't know what a B-Corp is.
Yep.
And I think it's becoming a lot more prevalent. I believe you're one of the first organisations in Australia.
Yeah, and one of the first. I think it was 6 organisations were the first organisations, and we were one of those. But I guess like right from the word go, when we were part of the Impact Hub network in Europe to after as Hub, the impact's always been part of the culture and the values of Hub. One of our values is beyond profit. And like, it's very easy for people to greenwash or say things. And especially when you're a growing organisation, like sometimes like you get up in the morning and there are other things to do.
Yes.
So what I've always found is that having the certifications and opening yourself up to outside audit, I guess it's a way of keeping you honest. And people can cut through messages these days which are not authentic. So I find that the certifications they keep you open to constantly getting better and constantly work on it. It doesn't mean that you're the best at something, and it doesn't mean you're perfect, but it means that you're getting held to account to keep on getting better.
Yeah.
So whether it was the B Corp certification, being certified carbon neutral, one of the only co-working operators globally to be certified carbon neutral, where both our organisation is carbon neutral, but also, for instance, when you bought your office and chose to put your team here today, that office is also certified carbon neutral because we offset any of the emissions from that. The other things we're on to our reconciliation action plan.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yeah, and then also health and safety accredited.
Right.
Combination of all of these things actually also comes back to helping us attract and retain the best talent for Hub. And one of the things that we've seen has really worked is our focus on helping to create a great place to work for our team, then translate into them creating a great place to work for our customers. And I wish it's not exactly rocket science when you think about it.
No, it's not, isn't it? But
it took us ages to come up with that.
Right. Right.
And so we've just been Great Place to Work certified again for the fourth year running, and that's something that investment, it's been a big investment, but it's really come through where we've been able to connect the culture of our company with the differentiator and competitive advantage that we offer to the marketplace to our customers. So linking that up has been absolutely key to our strategy for success.
I see. I like how the term you use, beyond profit, and the term greenwashing is pretty prevalent out there, isn't it?
Absolutely.
And some people, it's probably not in bad intent, but they're saying we need to do this. It's a bit more of a tick the box exercise than ingrained in culture, as you say. Just on that, would there be any, for our listeners and viewers that are perhaps trying to get their head around how they can initially incorporate those B-Corp principles?
Yeah.
Is there any ways that you found from years ago, or how you're ingraining that in the organisation?
Yeah. Look, for starters, is to not think that you can do everything. Like at the start, like I just reeled off a whole bunch of different things. Like if we had done all of those things at WorkGo when we were one person or 20 people, we would have caved under all of the expectations. But making a decision to start on your journey of how do I, make an impact beyond just profit would be the biggest thing I'd say. You can reach out to many companies are not certified B Corps. But you can just as easily go to the website of B Corp and start wrapping your head around the principles there. Yeah. And that's what I'd certainly encourage people that's a step. But I think it's also important to figure out what impact can I make that's kind of like I can own that. We create workspaces, so for us to really concentrate on creating a great place to work for our team, there's a natural step there where you can kind of see that it makes strategic sense. And so I'd encourage every business out there is work out what you can make an outsized impact at, because it's not going to be everything.
Yes.
But depending on which industry you're in, pick something that you think you can make that outsized impact, or even just ask your team, what do they care about, and let's just start. And let's just start, focusing on that. If not your team, if you're just the one person, ask a customer, what impact would that customer like you to make? So that there's people around you that I think can guide you on to what that first step should be.
Yeah, I think that's really practical advice, Brad, because so often that, like we talked about, those choices about what we're going to do and what we're not going to do. If you're trying to do the whole thing from day one, it can kind of end kind of just plateaus out, doesn't it? So I think that's really practical advice.
And just as an example, one of the things, so we've got our Flexi Impact membership program. So each year we do 1% of our memberships we gift to not-for-profits or B Corps.
Right.
And I guess by way of demonstrating, when we first did that, it was a couple of organisations.
Yes. But
we see ourselves having probably about 6,000 members in 2022. So this year we gave away 60 different organisations across the country. And next year I suspect we'll be able to do 100. So now suddenly those small little numbers are now actually big numbers of customers that can come and work in at Hub each year, and that's a great program that we love doing each year.
That's brilliant. I met two businesses at your Flinders Street location that were on that program.
Oh, great!
And
great.
It was just great. I mean, they were so appreciative of it. So it's we saw it firsthand, which is brilliant.
That's great.
In terms of customer insights, from a strategy advisory perspective, we see that the organisations that are as close to the market as possible, really reading what's happening both now and into the near future, are going to be able to make the best decisions.
Yep.
And it's evident you've been able to do that over a sustained period of time. I've heard you talk about, you've made deliberate strategy decisions of, I think you termed it an unfair advantage as such.
Yeah.
That you've made a decision you have more staff on site than your competitors.
Yep.
To clients and members. so that you're there in the offices, you're listening, you're having conversations, you're right at the heart of what's happening in your customers and members' business.
Yep.
And then it's helping you make your own decisions.
Yeah.
Can you talk through, was that it sounds like it was a deliberate choice you made, and how that's traveling for you at the moment?
Yeah, look, I guess it actually particularly helped when the pandemic hit,
Yes.
because a lot of the, or actually most of our customers, they weren't here just for a flexible desk. They were here because their team was here, and because they were wanting to grow their business, and then they had an in-person relationship with our team, which meant that most of their interaction with Hub was not something that was online or done over email. It was something where our customers actually had somebody that had a name and that they knew.
Yes.
And that meant that we retained a lot more of our customers than many of our competitors did. So that certainly was a benefit during the pandemic, albeit unintended.
I see.
But I guess when you run workplaces, you actually have your customers in the room with you.
Yes. Yes.
Which is not the norm for how a lot of customer
it's not, is it?
relationships B2B happens these days.
No.
So, or certainly B2C as well.
Yes.
So getting those qualitative and quantitative insights. We do a lot of surveys and CX scores and NPS scores. But for instance, our monthly check-ins or our quarterly check-ins or that ability to get that qualitative insight and capture feedback as we go.
Right.
We use a couple of different tech platforms and different things there, from Rate It to a few different things, and HubSpot, and it's really allowed us to gather a lot of data. Which we just had a CXO join the team, a Chief Experience Officer, and she's really enjoying getting into all of the data.
Fantastic.
Because it's those insights that help us actually grow the product and become more relevant. And I guess we only see as where I kind of almost feel like we're only scratching the surface as well.
Yes.
In terms of if we're really about helping companies attract and retain the best talent. How do we extend that to really understand what can our workspace do most effectively to help our customers? So there's a long journey there, and I guess I'm really excited about the future for our company, but also for the workplace. Like, it would be a terrible waste of a good crisis if we snap back to the old way of working pre-pandemic.
Yes.
Like, there's terrible stats for, like 85% of people not connected at work and what forth, like, we don't want to snap back to that way.
Yes.
This is an amazing opportunity to recreate how we work. But it's not just the workspace, it's how we work. And that's what I'm really excited about, for instance, having the suburban locations or regional locations, which would allow people to work near home. That's incredibly exciting. And just to connect that back to your question there, it's through having that relationship with our customers that's really close, allows us to have those insights that gives us confidence to make those big bets about, well, where do you set up one of these workspaces, even though it's not going to be open for 18 months from now. And we're not completely even sure what the workspace is going to be like. But we have the confidence in seeing that the demand for flexible workspace, focused on a premium experience, that the demand's going to outstrip supply. And we're confident that where we can make those investments and work with landlords and work with businesses, makes what we're doing a good bet.
I think the picture you painted there, Brad, I think it's very unique when you look at this industry and compared to a lot of others, even software, remote and more kind of technology-based businesses. The picture you painted there about listening, to your customers and their customers' insights, I think is pretty unique, and a lot of other industries can learn from that. Because I think a lot of people use the excuse that we do the surveys, we know what our customers want, but it's the qualitative aspect, like you mentioned, that that even in formal conversations, you're bumping into someone in the corridor. That's where sometimes you get the biggest insights, don't you, in terms of those decisions?
Absolutely. And then another thing that, let's understand, it's relatively unique about co-working.
Yes.
So many of the operators connect and learn from each other. And two key things here to mention. Like it was operators getting together, which is how we ended up creating the Industry Association Flexible Workspace Australia.
Right.
And so you've got operators there sharing learnings and like ultimately, look, it's good when you see an industry that's growing at a rate where you don't necessarily have to create a product where your customers come at the expense of somebody else.
Yeah.
The pie's growing each year, and so that's really good. So we've been able to create an industry association there, and I really do believe in growing the industry as a whole as one of the impacts that Hub wants to have. Also, for me as an entrepreneur and as a CEO, I've always found it incredibly helpful to be involved globally with all of the different conferences and associations, where I think it's if I can make sure that in my sandbox, being Australia and co-working, making sure that Hub and myself are an equal or more knowledgeable person by looking at what's going on around the globe, that's something that also gives you that advantage over the competition, where you've just got a exposure to so many different ways of doing things, and then we can then as Hub make the right decisions about where we position ourselves, and a lot of that's got to do with really investing time in building relationships with people overseas and other operators all around the world.
Just on that point, where would you say this region, Australia, fits in terms of the rest of the world in terms of co-working and all the concepts?
Certainly some of the stuff that Hub and other operators in the market are doing here, it's the same or of a better standard than what I see overseas. And it's interesting. Somebody put to me recently, Australia as a whole, there's always been a much greater investment into the team and into staff, and whether that's everything from regulatory stuff like work health and safety or super or different workers' rights as a basis, regulatory wise, or whether it's also culturally how we want to grow our companies, invest. I think Australia's always invested in the workspace comparatively more than what I've seen in many instances overseas. So I don't think that flex workspace or co-working is any different from that. Ultimately, what you've got is a culture of organisations where, and yes, there's always ways to pick holes in things.
Yes, of course.
But I've seen lots of workspaces overseas, and certainly the workspaces that we deliver in Australia, they're world standard workspaces. So that's been interesting to see how that happens. And then globally, workspaces are all focusing on how do we build out that hospitality kind of experience, and really focused on that.
Yeah, so just on that point, in terms of culture, let's just spend a moment there. I've heard you talk about, I actually really like the terms and the concept. In terms of real estate, it's typically, meters squared conversation. But at the Hub, you talk about people squared.
Our old meters squared to people squared.
Yeah, it was not being in the industry was new to me. You've probably heard it so often, but coming from outside the industry, it really resonated, because when you talk about culture and even the mindset of just of starting from a base level, we're serving humans here as opposed to just serving real estate.
Yeah.
So, I mean, again, it's probably not a new mindset to you, but I think a lot of other organisations in quite different industries can learn from that.
Yeah.
Because I think starting with that hospitality, experience, and I believe space as a service is the term that's being used now, is huge. So can you talk us through in terms of your mindset and your team's mindset and how that flows onto culture?
Yeah, sure thing. Look, certainly, so Anthony Slumbers has a quote of, no one needs an office, you need a productive workforce.
Yes.
Or put a different way, like ultimately we're creating a workspace experience for people each day. And the pandemic's also taught us that people don't necessarily need that desk in an office to get their work done. So what truly is that role of the office? Because we also know that we really still want the office. And I think there's something really key there to understand about how a workspace helps create culture.
Right.
And that ultimately we need to deliver an experience that is greater in value than the cost of the commute.
I see.
And we need to deliver an experience each day where our team chooses to work with our company not with one of the competitors.
Mm.
So if we're getting people to come into the workspace each day, I think there's a lot that we can learn and take from the hospitality industry about how you ultimately create that experience. And, whether it's the smile when somebody gets out of the lift, through to the coffee, through to having the amenities, through to having a thoughtful design and diverse different spaces. All of those things go into creating an experience where, like if you can, people are probably spending half of their waking hours or more working.
Yes.
So, if we can make that experience a good experience, that not only benefits our business, but, it benefits the person and their families and their communities at large. So, really understanding how important creating
the fact that you're looking at it from that perspective, how that impacts that person and their personal and their family lives, I think it sounds like it's inherent for you, but a lot of businesses do not look down that far down the chain. So I think that's quite unique.
Like if and I guess that's where that if we can realize that work is not a thing you go to, it's a thing you do. If people realize just the impact that they can have and the retention and ultimately impact that will give them to the bottom line by creating a workspace culture that is something that people want to be a part of, that's a good strategic decision.
Yes.
And it's also one we're connecting that with workspace as a service. So, you're a strategic consultancy. You're not in the business of workspace as a service. And so the concept of you taking a traditional lease, tying up your balance sheet, investing in an office fit out, and like you don't even, if you're a strategic person and you don't even know where your business is going to be in 5 years.
Exactly.
But you need to align yourself with a workspace partner.
Yes.
And just like you can get your software requirements or your technology requirements as a service, best to leave your workspace to an expert that you can align with. And then you focus on advising companies on strategy. We'll focus on making sure that your workspace is an amazing experience.
Yes.
Whether you're a smaller business or a larger business, it just makes sense. And I think that's where we see post-pandemic that more and more companies, like for instance, the latest deal that we did was for 130 people, from a larger organisation. And in this particular case, they've taken a spot that normally you would have had for about 70 people. Now, you can't adapt and do that yourself if you're just dealing with traditional leases. But then Hub and other operators in our industry, they're positioning themselves as the workspace solution partner.
Right.
And then it's another one, but landlords are also looking to operate as flex operators because they're not in the business of running flexible workspace and hospitality operations.
They're not that close to the end customer, the end human.
They're making an investment, and their value is determined by their yield and rental return, and then ultimately the valuation. So just like they've done with hotel operators, it's better off partnering with brands and hospitality specialists, such as what Hub is for the workplace.
Yeah, it's a really good way to put it. And to your point at the beginning of our conversation, you genuinely help your clients attract and retain staff. We've seen it firsthand with our organisation and our staff that they enjoy the conversations they have with the staff here and the conversations they have with other businesses. And that is really as part of the threads of the culture. Yeah. So you can't really separate the two, which I love. In terms of, this is a bit of a kind of a left field one, but in terms of in the strategy work that we do, we're moving to more of an open strategy based approach.
Yep.
So that is away from the traditional, top down CEO or board just making the big calls without any conversation or involvement in staff. And I've heard you quote the stat. I've seen it before. I think it's by 2025, 75% of the workforce are going to be millennials.
I think
it's around that.
Yes.
And I think the latest Bureau of Stats is coming out, and it's been in the headlines the last couple of days. That leaders that aren't recognising and being aware of having to involve, a certain level of their staff in these conversations to be part of the insights and the decisions, they're probably going to be missing an opportunity. So what I hear from you, you're taking that both from clients, you're bringing your clients into those conversations, your partners, all those different stakeholders, as well as your staff,
Yep.
to help you make those decisions. So is that what you're seeing in this industry in terms of helping you make your own decisions, yourself and your board?
Yeah, look, I'll take that in a few different ways. Certainly,
Yeah.
people need to recognise that the expectations of a millennial or a Gen Z or
Yes.
They're very different to
Yes.
like what mine. Like I'm a Gen X.
Right. Yes.
My expectations of work are very different to what most of the hub team are, and indeed most people in the workforce. So we've got to realise that people expect something different from their workplace, and we've also got to realise when people are getting asked to work anytime, anywhere. Of course, they're going to have different expectations.
Yes.
So keeping yourself abreast of those of what's important to your team is really important. The other thing that I think is also interesting, so the opposite of the statistic of a huge proportion of the workforce being millennials, is they also say you've got 5 generations in the workforce now, and that's a big deal, and that's actually really hard for somebody to wrap their heads around. And certainly, if we link that back to the workplace, like it's hard enough just figuring yourself around a workforce for the millennials, like we were just thinking, but I've also got to figure it out for everybody. So
that's a really good observation.
Yeah, so setting up a workspace has actually just got really hard and really complex.
Yes.
Which again leads back to ultimately reading the market and understanding the value proposition for your company is incredibly important, because then you know what stats and what trends to look at. There's so many stats and trends out there. If we were to take all of them into account, it'd just be noise and we'd be making bad decisions.
Yes.
But our recognition of what our ultimate role is for our customers and those customers now, including landlords that need to attract and retain the best tenants, our understanding of our role there gives us clarity and gives us confidence in how to make decisions.
Yeah, right. It's the observation you made is probably obvious to you, but having 5 generations, in the workplace, I've never really thought about that, because there is often so much focus on just 1 or 2 generations. But it's so true. It's a difficult challenge to meet all those needs, and then the value proposition. And just in terms of strategy as well, there's a concept of within open strategy about creating moments of serendipity.
Yep.
So often with strategy, you traditionally pair serendipity, chance moments with strategy. It's normally about very planned, very concise decisions, and of course it still is. But what we experience in co-working spaces, we've met a couple of customers through the space here, is that those moments in the kitchen or the hallways where you're bumping into organisations that could be very different industries to yours, and just having that conversation with a person from a very different industry or a potential customer and a client is being significant. So in your decisions, has that been a conscious decision to make more of those moments? Because it's a tough one to navigate, isn't it?
Yeah, look, I think this is one of the big advantages of just the whole concept of co-working and flexible workspaces and shared workspaces in general. Like one of the key value propositions is that you are surrounded by different people doing different things.
I see.
Or even where there are niche workspaces, focused on a particular industry. And sometimes that's a good thing, because you get to learn from a concentrated group of people that are all trying to figure out the same challenges and the same business models. So you've got to pick the right co-working space for you and your business, because whichever choice you make there will actually say a lot about your culture. But back to the creating serendipity. If you think about a co-working space, it's quite unique to have multiple companies with their own teams and their own culture coming into the one space. And I think that's really, it gives you again that unfair advantage where ultimately there's so many inputs that one can take in. But this gives you it ultimately puts you in a container where you've got other people where they may have different business models, but they've all picked Hub or they've picked out of the co-working space, probably because they wanted to be around like-minded people.
Yeah, so
there is
that was
something
certainly part
quite
of the
unique
decision.
there. Yeah, and this
we
is
made.
one of the things that I love about co-working. I always encourage people to like shop around different flexible workspace providers because there'll be one that's right for you. And it's not just about the price point. Like ultimately, this is about your culture. So yes, Serendipity's there. I guess it's built in to the concept of co-working and flex space.
Yeah, great. Thanks for sharing those insights. In terms of communities, I'd say that's you talked about before even launching the hub, if I've got it right, 2010, 11, there was a significant period of time of just getting the community together, and I'm sure there's still a big focus on that. The hub brand seems to do that really well. We talked about you being a B-Corp, holding yourselves to account about your social and economic impact.
Yep.
So when you think about communities, as a leader and working with your team, is it a conversation you have often? Because I'm trying to get is there anything that can share with our audience too, because some people don't look at their clients or the broader market like a community.
Yeah.
They say, we're not a not-for-profit, that doesn't apply to us.
Yep.
But we see in strategy, the more you can have that mindset that you fall into a bigger community.
Yeah.
And if you can be aware of that. So is there anything that's been helpful or you make a deliberate practice in that context?
Certainly the ability to have those in-person check-ins with our customers, which link back to having enough staff that you can to do that. Getting those insights into what's important to them was really important.
Yep.
The Flexi Impact program is also a great way of doing that because we get to see organisations that are trying to have an impact in just so many different things.
Yes.
And one of the things we've implemented now also is that there's a 25% quota of all of those Flexi Impact for organisations that are focused on Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders. So again, it's about how do you bring that diversity of different thoughts into the business, but into the community. To your to your point, I think one of the biggest things that has been a challenge, but also a learning that I've taken away from, is communities are not static. We've had to evolve and look to tell you like the community that we had at Hub at the start. Is very different to the community that we have now.
Yes.
But it's not that we don't have community now, it's a different kind of community. And we had to evolve that as we went. And also coming up with like, what is that mix of community that matches with our business model? That's been something that we've had to recognise and let evolve. Because if we fought it, and like we did fight it for a while there, it doesn't end up working. So recognising and there was a key point. I think it was around the 2016. When we did to Hub Southern Cross, we recognised that more of our membership community were employees of the organisation that they worked for, as opposed to a freelancer or a startup founder.
Yes, I see.
Okay, so when that flip came and it was more about how do we build a community for the teams of organisations to want to be a part of, that was a critical inflection point. And it was through actually recognising that we had reached that inflection point and then letting things evolve, that ultimately we were able to create an organisation which has got a bigger impact now than it did from its earlier days, but also an impact that I guess has evolved with the times, and been something that supports our business model and continued growth.
Yeah, thanks for sharing. That's really helpful. I think you recognise that the communities do evolve, as you say, is really important, because if you're just looking at something that's stagnant, it's not changing, it's not really helpful. And in terms of the point you made there in recognising the mix of the things that matter to those communities, and the things the stakeholders that you've talked about today, from your staff, your members, your customers, it seems like it's inherently built into the strategy and the mindset.
Yeah, it is. It's in the DNA by now, which is great.
Brilliant. I think a lot of people can learn from that. Well, Brad, it's been a brilliant conversation. Thank you for sharing all those kind of insights from your team in the industry.
Thank you.
We're looking forward to hearing more about the growth and expansion. And again, I think a lot of other perhaps seemingly unrelated industries can learn a lot from the mindset that you bring and the organisation brings. So thanks again.
No, and thank you for choosing Hub for your business.
Not at all. It's been brilliant.